I need you to listen up to me right now. Do not ever go to the Grand Canyon alone. Over 1,000 people have been reported missing from there since just 2018, and the Grand Canyon is unmistakably the deadliest national park in the United States. But if you don't believe me, you better keep watching, because I'm gonna prove it. In 1976, a man was digging through his late grandfather's garage at the edge of the Grand Canyon when he noticed a mysterious canoe. The canoe looked ordinary enough at first, but when the man pulled it into the light, he noticed an old, tightly wrapped canvas bag sitting at the bottom of the boat. And when he finally gathered the courage to reach in, pull out the bag, and unwrap it, he could not believe his eyes. He had found a skeleton, not just a skull, but an entire human skeleton. Ellsworth and Emery Kolb were two brothers who had built their own photo studio near the Grand Canyon back in the early 1900s. The Kolbs used the studio as a home base for their outdoor photography. They snapped photos of daring river runs, mule trains, and of course, tourists descending into the depths of the canyon, and captured iconic images that shaped how we think of the Grand Canyon and the American West for that matter as a whole. Oh, and speaking of photographs, look at this photograph. Every time I do, it makes me laugh. This is me in high school, and I'm trying to become the very first person that graduated from my high school to ever reach 1 million subscribers on YouTube. So please hit that subscribe button right now and help me prove to my teachers that I'm not a failure in life. Anyways, when Emery Kolb died in December of 1976, his family braced themselves for the tall task of clearing out his garage. It was an ancient, cobweb-filled annex stacked with half a century's worth of river gear, cameras, and the stubborn secrets of a man who had spent his life exploring one of the biggest and wildest places on Earth. As Kolb's grandson, who was also named Emery, dug through the cluttered garage, he battled back against spiders and boxes upon boxes of old photographs. I'm sure it was at least a little interesting to be digging through a bunch of history, but if Emery Kolb was anything like the grandpas that I know, he probably collected plenty of useless random crap as well. And when the young Emery looked around the garage, he saw his grandfather's old canoe hanging from the ceiling. He instantly began to dread whatever treasures his grandpa might have hidden away inside of the canoe, and as it turns out, this dread was spot on, though certainly took a different form than he was first expecting. And of course, we all know what happened next, and the discovery of the skeleton obviously started a swirl of suspicion around the older Emery Kolb. I mean, we're all familiar with the term skeletons in the closet, in reference to someone hiding a secret, but I don't know many people who have found a literal human skeleton in their dead grandpa's garage. And so naturally, young Emery Kolb and his whole family were pretty confused. Like, how did the skeleton get there? How long had it been hidden inside that canoe? And most importantly, who did it belong to? One of the very first theories that investigators suggested was that this mysterious skeleton might hold the answers to one of the most infamous mysteries in Grand Canyon history, that is the disappearance of Glenn and Bessie Hyde. Now, I've done a video on them before, and so I'm just gonna summarize their story pretty quickly here. Back in 1928, newlyweds Glenn and Bessie Hyde attempted to set a speed record for traveling through the Grand Canyon on a boat, and Bessie was going to be the first woman to do so as well. In November of 1928, Glenn and Bessie, well, they were on this quest and they disappeared. Their boat would be found undamaged, but no trace of the couple themselves was ever found. And what makes their story extremely important to us today is that just before their disappearance, the Hydes had met photographer Emery Kolb. In fact, Kolb actually took a photograph of the couple, and this was one of the last photos that was ever taken of them, and he was one of the last people to have ever seen them before they vanished. And so now, nearly 50 years later, an unidentified skeleton is found in Kolb's garage. And you might think that things couldn't get much weirder than that, but you'd be dead wrong. When forensic experts began looking closer at what became known as the Kolb skeleton, they noticed a few key details. First, they could tell that the skeleton belonged to a man. And second, it was covered in pieces of tattered clothing. And third, when they examined the skull, they were shocked to find a bullet hole located in the right temple, and a .22 caliber bullet was sitting inside of the skull itself. And so, Could this skeleton have belonged to the long-lost Glenn Hyde? And if it did, then Glenn's death would suddenly have an unexplained gunshot and had just become way darker than it already was. When the University of Arizona had the chance to conduct a forensic investigation on the skeleton, they came to the conclusion that the skeleton had actually belonged to a man no older than 22 years old. And they also concluded that this man had died no earlier than 1972. And this, of course, should have ruled out the possibility of the remains belonging to Glenn Hyde, but as you'll see, it may have just made things so much stranger. After discovering the skeleton, the young Emery was obviously confronted with a whirlwind of feelings. I don't know how else to say that. Was his famous and accomplished, well-respected grandfather, who he was literally named after, really the man that he thought he was? I mean, what would happen to his family's legacy if this skeleton turned out to reveal even deeper, darker secrets? Could the remains have been connected somehow to the Cole brothers themselves? I don't know, maybe a total stranger had tried to attack them at their studio one day, and either Ellsworth or Emery used a gun in active self-defense. And now, of course, the evidence of this potential incident only revealed itself after the two brothers had passed away. And maybe that sounds a little far-fetched. It probably is, but there was no evidence to support a story that even hinted towards foul play. And again, the Cole brothers were well respected, and their reputations as explorers and photographers were widely celebrated. But still, when you find an unknown skeleton, your imagination is bound to run a little wild. It wasn't until 2008, over 30 years after the Kolb skeleton was discovered in that old canoe, that the son of a former Grand Canyon Park ranger donated several hundred historical photographs to the Grand Canyon Museum collection. Now, most of these photos were routine images of canyon life, mule trains, early tourists, long demolished buildings, but among them were a few photos that genuinely caught the eye of the people in charge of sorting them out, including a few grainy black and white photographs of a skeleton on a ledge under the canyon's rim near Shoshone Point. These images showed a man lying where he had fallen or laid down on a narrow shelf of stone. A single bullet hole pierced the skull just above the right temple. There was a date on those photographs, and it said June 4th, 1933. And there was also a note that confirmed the grim truth about what had happened. And I don't use the word grim lightly at all. In fact, I actually kind of need to take a chill pill here because what happens next is very dark. And so let me lighten the mood for just a second and tell you about the reason that I'm even able to make these videos in the first place. That, of course, would be because of Drink Element, who is the sponsor of this video. Now, it's been a long time since I've been to the Grand Canyon, but if I were to go and do some hiking, I guarantee you I would sweat, and I would sweat a lot. And if I wasn't going to replace my electrolytes in this hypothetical situation, I would be in very bad shape. I might even end up in one of my own videos. This is why Drink Element is so important if you're gonna be in a hypothetical or real situation where you're gonna be sweating a lot. Drink Element has no sugar. Drink Element has no crap, no BS. And you're gonna find all that stuff in pretty much every other electrolyte drink mix on the market. All Drink Element has is the electrolytes that you need to stay hydrated and healthy, and it has a great taste. That's the other thing. But don't take my word for it. Click the link in the description right now, or go to drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking. When you make a purchase through my link, you are going to get a sample pack of 8 additional Element sticks thrown in with your order for no extra cost. So you're gonna get free Element, and you're gonna get to kind of sample all their different flavors, which is an incredible deal. And so one more time, drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking. Go get your sample pack. And all right, that was a fun chill pill, but let's get back into this story and all of the other stories I'm going to tell you after. Things are not good in the Grand Canyon right now. So investigators are looking over these old photos. They're trying to figure out what's going on with this freaking skeleton. And they soon find out that these images were of a young adult male that was discovered in June of 1933 in the Grand Canyon on a cliff near Shoshone Point. A 22 or 32 caliber pistol was found near the skeleton's right hand and was almost certainly used by the victim against himself. He took his own life. But the biggest revelation from all of their painstaking research was when they discovered the identity of the person who found that unfortunate soul who took their own life in the first place. And I'll give you one guess, because he's the one that also took the photograph. It was Emery Kolb. Nobody knows why, but after discovering and reporting the skeleton, Kolb took the bones back to his home and stashed them away, only for his grandson to stumble upon them over 50 years later. Investigators were eventually able to superimpose images of the Kolb skeleton and compare it to the newly discovered images of this black and white skeleton, and they were able to confirm that they both belonged to the same unidentified 1933 John Doe. One possible explanation for why Emery had kept the Kolb skeleton was the fact that during his life, he had served as a jury representative for the Grand Canyon region for many years, actually. It's believed now that he might have been asked to store the remains for safekeeping, which is a very odd request. But, this is during the Depression era, and so not exactly known for being an easy time for record keeping. And Emery was known for his reliability, after all. Maybe he meant to return the skeleton eventually. Maybe he forgot, and then it just sat there in the old canoe for decades until death pried open the garage door and revealed it to the world. I don't know. But the truth is that this is just what the Grand Canyon does. It chews people up, and it spits out their bones whenever it feels like it. Just over 88 years after the remains of the man were found, a lot of questions still linger. I'm sure a lot of you guys are thinking these things already. Most notably, who was he? Was he local to the area? Or had he chosen to travel to the Grand Canyon to end his life? Did anyone even know he was missing? Was anyone still looking for him? And finally, if this wasn't Glenn Hyde, then where was he and his wife Bessie? And the canyon has not gotten any less dangerous since 1933 either. Decades later, a man would foolishly try to conquer the Grand Canyon with a rickety hand-carved raft. A man named Thomas Robeson and his corgi were floating down the Colorado River on a wooden raft. For at least a little while, Thomas enjoyed the calm flow of the river and the chance to spend a day in the great outdoors. But as he approached the heart of the canyon, the rapids grew faster and wilder, and he started to wonder if he was truly prepared to face the dangerous power of the Grand Canyon. And he'd soon find out the harsh truth very, very quickly. Thomas Robeson came to the Grand Canyon from his home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was 58 years old, but he was young at heart and always looking for his next adventure. Living in the American Southwest, he had a fascination with the wild beauty of the canyon, and he had a restless desire to test himself against the toughest treks that nature had to offer. And so, Thomas hopped into his champagne-colored 2001 Toyota Tacoma with his 11-year-old Welsh corgi, looking for some adventure. When he arrived in the greater Grand Canyon area, he parked his truck at a place called Lee's Ferry in the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area just north of Grand Canyon National Park. This spot in particular is a super popular location used as a launch for whitewater rafting trips along the Colorado River. And so from Lee's Ferry, he and his dog set off on a journey down the river right through the heart of the Grand Canyon on a raft that he had built himself. And look, this kind of rafting trip is far from impossible. It's been done thousands of times before by paddlers of all ages and skill levels. But even with modern equipment, floating the Colorado River can be a dangerous thing to do. The rapids are violent, the water is surprisingly cold, and the canyon walls are thousands of feet tall in some spots, creating a maze with very few escape routes. I actually have a picture of Thomas's self-made raft right here. And as you can see, it was really just 3 planks of wood, each with mysterious and artistic etchings carved into them that were all tied together with multicolored rope. And don't get me wrong, it looks pretty cool, but it definitely looks pretty sketchy as well. Thomas also had a single hand-carved paddle and an orange life jacket, which he had also customized with some of his artwork. Thomas was clearly an eccentric and artistic guy, and even though his gear seemed to truly reflect his colorful personality, it didn't really look like it was capable of floating across a calm, peaceful lake, let alone through the middle of the mighty Grand Canyon. And it's safe to say that when Thomas set off, he had no idea what he was getting himself into. After a few days had passed, no one had heard from Thomas. He hadn't reached out to any of his family or anyone back home in Santa Fe, and at first no one really thought much of it. I mean, the Colorado River's long and remote, and depending on how far into the canyon he planned on going, it might take him a few days to get back to his car. It wasn't until April 21st, 2024, when a park ranger noticed that a mysterious Toyota Tacoma, the one that belonged to Thomas, had been sitting in the Lee's Ferry parking lot for multiple days, seemingly abandoned. When the ranger decided to investigate the vehicle, they discovered that it belonged to Thomas, and of course they started to do a bit more digging. They canvassed the immediate area around the truck, but nobody in the Glen Canyon recreational area had any helpful information. And naturally, the next thing they started to wonder about was the river itself. But at the same time, they hadn't gotten any reports of anyone matching Thomas's description seen at any of the known takeout points downstream. Park officials started to come to the realization that they were not going to be able to solve this mystery with just a few quick questions. If there was a man and his corgi traveling around the canyon on a, hand-carved raft that stuck out like a sore thumb, then realistically somebody would have reported seeing them by now. But there had been 0 sightings, and it was clear that his truck had been sitting there for a while now, and so they had to face the facts, which were that Thomas Robeson was officially missing. The Grand Canyon National Park Office of Communication released an official missing person statement on April 24th, 2024, 3 days after Thomas's truck was officially declared to be abandoned. Searches were conducted by air and on foot. Helicopters flew over the twisting river, scanning for any sign of life or debris. Rangers hiked through the canyon and down the nearby trails, calling out Thomas's name. Rescue teams also wondered if his dog would be the key to leading them to a breakthrough in their search. They hoped to find tracks or maybe even some evidence that the dog had gone to the bathroom somewhere along the trails or the banks of the river. But the search quickly dragged on for over a week, and they still hadn't found anything. And so search and rescue crews started to wonder if the river had just swallowed them up. I don't know. Naturally, the people working on the rescue and the public all started to have their own theories and questions. They wondered what Thomas's plan was, in the first place. I mean, rivers only flow in one direction, and so when he parked his truck in the Lee's Ferry area, he would have known that he had to some way find his way back, right? Was he seriously planning on hitchhiking or even walking back with his raft and his dog? Remember, it's not just him. In my experience, hitchhiking is hard enough to do when you're all by yourself, let alone if you've got an animal and a bunch of wet gear and like a giant raft. Some people began to wonder if Thomas's raft had wrecked early on in his journey, leaving him and the dog stranded in one of the canyon's more remote trails. Like maybe they had abandoned the river entirely and then tried to hike their way out. And imagine if rescuers might have been wasting precious time searching the actual river itself while Thomas was in serious danger of dying from exposure or thirst somewhere else along the rocky cliffs of the canyon. Many people believed that Thomas had simply underestimated the river's power. In the spring, the melting ice and snow can swell the Colorado River to its most dangerous levels, making the rapids powerful enough to crush a small wooden raft like paper. If he was swept into one of those sections, it's possible that both Thomas and his dog were tragically pulled underneath the deadly churn. The longer the two were missing without a trace, the more intense the theories got. But then, suddenly, against all odds, rescue crews made a very improbable discovery at mile 6 of the Colorado River. On May 13th, search and rescue crews were floating down the river in the middle of their weeks-long search for Thomas Robeson. As they drifted slowly downstream, they scanned their eyes from side to side, looking for anything that might seem out of place, any sign that might lead them to a breakthrough or maybe even a rescue. Who knows? One of the park rangers peered along the banks of the river and saw a weird-shaped rock, or at least that's what he thought it was at first. He kind of did a double take and took a second look at this rock, and he just knew that he had to get closer to properly look at it. He had his crew flow over to that side of the river, and as they drifted closer and closer, they realized that this wasn't just a weird rock at all. They started to notice arms and legs. This was a human body. And when they pulled up right next to it, they got a good look at the clothing on the body, including one piece of clothing that made the Rangers stop in their tracks. It was an orange life vest with black hand-drawn artwork. Folks, they found Thomas Robison, but tragically, it was much too late. After they made the heartbreaking discovery of Thomas's remains, the rescuers continued to look around the same area, which was 6 miles downstream from where he had launched at Lee's Ferry. And, they were hoping to find pieces of Thomas's raft or even hoping to find his poor little dog somewhere nearby. But to this day, they haven't been able to find evidence of either. And since this incident was so recently, just a little over a year ago as of the time of this recording, no official cause of death has been released either, which only increases the level of mystery and, of course, tragedy around this case. It's the classic story of a man who was maybe a little bit too excited to venture out into the wild despite the danger, and his hubris tragically cost him his life and most likely the life of his dog, although I truly hope someone miraculously found the dog and rescued it. Unlikely, but you never know. And look, I talk a lot about stories with dark endings, and so sometimes I need to just fill in the blanks with a little bit of hope. It's good for my mental health. And though I was a little bit critical of Thomas's decision-making here, my heart genuinely goes out to his family and, to his dog as well. And this is a cautionary tale. The Grand Canyon clearly wants you to take it seriously, and if you try to treat it like a pond in your local park, it's going to make you pay. And unfortunately, Thomas's tragedy is way too familiar, almost like another mystery that took place in the canyon back in January of 2015, when a strange spiritual text message caused a family to fear the absolute worst. Let me introduce you to Drake Kramer, a geology-obsessed college student living in San Antonio, Texas. At 21 years old, Drake was extremely kind and he was deeply connected to the power of nature. He was in the process of turning that passion into a bright future by pursuing a degree in geology when all of a sudden his family started to notice that he was beginning to talk about the outdoors in a more, let's say, spiritual way. Here's what I mean. Drake was normally a pretty grounded, intelligent, and ambitious kid, by all accounts that I could find. He was a student, and he even had a job at Lowe's in San Antonio. But in late January, something inside of Drake just kind of shifted. On January 29th, Drake and his father, Robin Kramer, went to the movie theater together and saw American Sniper. And this is a total aside, but does anyone remember the bizarre fake baby they made Bradley Cooper hold in that movie? Like, that doll still gives me chills to this day, honestly. Sorry, I just had to get that off my chest. So they go to this movie, and Drake was apparently in good spirits. Maybe he wasn't as bothered by the fake baby as I was, but just one day after that nice father-son movie night, he suddenly decided to leave his home in Texas and hit the road on like a spur-of-the-moment adventure. He texted his family from the road, and he told them that he planned to go to one of the most scenic outdoor destinations in the world, Grand Canyon National Park. On January 21st, Drake arrived in Arizona with his white 2007 Mazda 323 and checked into the Bright Angel Lodge, which is a hotel at the south rim of the canyon. He spent the night at the lodge, enjoying the rustic beauty of the building and seemingly looking forward to whatever adventure he had planned for the next day. Drake kept texting his parents this entire time. He was usually the type of kid that would stay in touch, but then all of a sudden, his messages started to get a bit more poetic. And folks, that's where this last-minute trip started to get really, really weird. While Drake was at the lodge, he texted his parents that he loved everyone deeply and that he needed to, quote, return to Mother Earth and, quote, set his soul free. And some of you might interpret those texts as a cry for help, especially in hindsight, but this was also just a part of Drake's introspective nature. He was basically just saying that he looked forward to unplugging, taking a break, and reconnecting with nature. Drake checked out of the Bright Angel Lodge the very next day, February 1st, and he left his car in the parking lot, setting out into the park. Maybe whatever he was looking for was like way, way out there. But his parents had noted Drake's shift in tone over the text messages, and as the day went on, they still hadn't heard from him. They texted him, they called him, they tried calling the lodge as well, but they couldn't figure out where he was. This wasn't like him at all, and as much as it hurt them to admit, his parents were starting to get extremely fearful. What did their son's text messages mean? How did he plan on returning to Mother Earth or setting his soul free? His parents were honestly too scared to answer those questions for themselves, and I haven't even told you guys yet about the most chilling text that he sent to his stepmom. I'll get into that in just a second, but his parents decided they weren't going to wait around any longer, and so Robin and Brenda Kramer reported their son missing the very next day, February 2nd. Park rangers launched a massive search covering nearly 300 square miles of steep ravines, dense forests, exposed ridgelines, and of course the perilous drop-offs that are just all over Grand Canyon National Park. Crews combed the rim on foot while helicopters scanned from up above. Dog teams were brought in to search for a scent, and specialized teams performed several over-the-rim technical searches, checking places that most visitors never even see. They searched for 6 grueling days, with pretty stable daytime temperatures around 60 degrees Fahrenheit at the top of the rim, but there was rocky and unstable terrain deeper in the canyon, and the winter snow down there would stay shaded for most of the day as well. The mix of terrain and conditions made their search much more difficult than a normal one. The 6-day search unfortunately revealed 0 new clues or information to explain Drake's disappearance, and the efforts scaled way down after this. The south rim of the Grand Canyon is truly beautiful, but it can be brutal as well, and for all we know, Drake Kramer could still be somewhere out there because he's still missing to this day. The only thing we have left of him is his final text to Brenda. This is the one I mentioned earlier, and it said, quote, "I truly love and cherish every soul I met and will meet in my lifetime. Love, Drake Lyons Kramer." That last line is truly chilling, almost like the signature to a farewell letter, except his family still doesn't think he was saying goodbye necessarily, so I don't want to give you the wrong picture here, but years later, they would still return to the Grand Canyon to renew the search efforts. In 2016, his dad said, quote, "I don't know if he's out there trekking around trying to find himself. I don't know if something happened to him." And he added, quote, "Until there's proof otherwise, I have to believe he's still alive." If any of you out there have information about what happened to Drake Kramer, or if you find something suspicious in the Grand Canyon, the official Grand Canyon Silent Witness phone number is 928-638-7840. Drake seemed like such an amazing guy, and I hope we can get at least one miracle out of some of the stories in this video, and that he can be found soon. Drake's story is very recent, and it's heartbreaking, and the Grand Canyon has been known to haunt people, following them around like ghosts and pulling them in like it's nature's version of the Grim Reaper. And maybe no other story stands out quite like another unidentified skeleton they found near the canyon back in October of 1958. And this one gave police answers about a person they didn't even know they were looking for. How the hell does that happen? Well, I'll explain. You see, back in August of 1957, Mary Margaret Begay and 3 of her friends walked to a bar called the Grand Canyon Inn to have a few drinks and enjoy a peaceful summer night of laughter and fun. She didn't know it yet, but this dream evening would quickly turn into an absolute nightmare. Mary was a 20-year-old Navajo woman from the nearby community of Loop, Arizona, just outside of Grand Canyon National Park. This area was remote, rugged, and was home to an almost entirely indigenous population. Mary was described by those who knew her as kind, quiet, and dependable. She was working at the Grand Canyon's South Rim at Bright Angel Lodge, which happens to be the same hotel that Drake Kramer was last seen at, but this was a pretty common place for local Navajo residents to work at the time. She lived a simple life, but it was about to get crazier than she could have ever imagined. As their fun night at the Grand Canyon Inn went on, Mary and her friends ran into a bunch of different people. Some of them they knew, and some of them were complete strangers. Mary was very friendly to everyone she met, and while kindness is usually a good trait to have, unfortunately, it can also make somebody a target. As the night started to wind down, Mary began talking with these two random men that she had never met before. The sound of music and conversation inside the bar was getting a bit too loud, and Mary didn't even catch the names of these two men, but her friends and family were eventually able to figure out that they were both Hopi, which was another indigenous tribe in the area. To Mary, these men seemed friendly enough, but then again, everyone was nice to Mary. But at one point during the night, Mary looked around and all of a sudden she couldn't find her friends. The two men then asked her to step outside, and she decided that she would follow them. Maybe her friends were out there. She stood outside of the bar, kind of looking around, when suddenly the two men started walking over to their car. And in this moment, her two friends actually walked outside of the bar as well, and they watched as Mary, dressed in a white sweater and capri pants, followed the men over to their car. The men climbed inside, and then Mary did something that absolutely shocked her friends. She climbed inside the car too. Before her friends could even call out her name, ask her what she was doing, the car drove off on her way to who knows where with two complete strangers. And her friends were terrified, but they didn't know what else to do. This was 1957. It's not like they could just text her or follow her location, right? They had to just hope that somehow, some way, Mary would be okay. The next day, she didn't show up for her shift at the Bright Angel Lodge. And you'd think that her boss would be a little bit worried. It definitely was not like her to just skip work without any explanation, but at the time, no one really seemed that concerned, at least not right away. In fact, when she didn't come to work, park authorities just decided to fire her, and they boxed up her belongings, and they moved on. It wasn't until a few days later, when Mary's family came to visit her at the lodge, that they realized no one had heard from her since that night at the bar. They asked her friends, and they started to search around the whole Grand Canyon village, but they couldn't find her anywhere. And it's in this moment that they realized the dark, dark truth. Their young, sweet Mary had completely disappeared, and if they wanted any chance of finding her, they needed to act quickly. And so they reported her disappearance to the Navajo Nation authorities. Now, this is the point where in pretty much every other disappearance story I've told, I would say something like, 100 searchers scoured the canyon and dogs came in helicopters. But the truth is that didn't happen here. Unlike so many of the other mysteries I've covered on my channel, search crews didn't jump right into action. In fact, the county sheriff's office wouldn't even know that Mary was missing until over a year later in October of 1958. Sheriff Cecil Richardson received a report of an unidentified skeleton found near the Grand Canyon, and when he started to ask around with other local authorities, including the Navajo Nation, he kept hearing the same thing over and over again. Maybe it belonged to Mary Begay, which seemed like a promising lead, but there was just one problem. Cecil had never heard of Mary Begay, and he wasn't sure why. Maybe it fell through the cracks, or maybe someone in the sheriff's office had received a report but had cruelly decided to put it on the shelf and ignore it, or maybe accidentally did that. Maybe it was just incompetence. To this day, nobody knows for sure what happened. But as Cecil learned more about Mary's disappearance, he began to draw parallels to this newfound set of remains. The skeleton they had discovered was near an old set of clothing, and even though they were aged and damaged, the sheriff's office confirmed that they thought the clothes were consistent with the same white sweater and capri pants that Mary was last seen wearing. And so, have the sheriff's office managed to find the remains of a woman that they didn't even know was missing? For a brief moment, Cecil hoped that was true, but upon further research, the bones were determined to have belonged to a much younger female who was not of indigenous descent. The county sheriff's office named the skeleton Little Miss X, and they added her to their list of missing and unknown people that was only getting longer and longer. But even though this skeleton wasn't Mary's, Cecil did not give up. By 1959, he was looking elsewhere for Mary, chasing around every theory he could even possibly think of. Some folks speculated that she had run away to start a new life somewhere else, and police interviewed a woman who Mary had been friends with while working at the Bright Angel Lodge, and that woman said she believed Mary had run away from her life in Arizona and she was now living in Los Angeles. She believed that Mary didn't want her family to know where she was for some reason. Cecil even talked to another friend of Mary's who said that she heard Mary was now married and had a child and was living up in Oregon. And it's like, do we really think that sweet little Mary actually decided to leave her family and her friends and just go start a whole new life? It sounds far-fetched, and that's exactly what the police believed. They noted that Mary had been in constant contact with her family up to that point, and that she wasn't like estranged from any of them. Other people began to wonder if Mary and these two unidentified men might have accidentally driven off the edge of a remote canyon rim road, something like that. Maybe it was so dark that night that they just drove off the side of a cliff, like, I don't know. But of course, if that was the case, then why couldn't authorities find any tire tracks or evidence at all of a crashed car somewhere in or around the park? The Grand Canyon is big, of course, but they didn't think it was possible to hide 3 bodies and a ruined car forever, right? And of course, you have to wonder about foul play. You've probably been screaming that at your screen this entire story. Mary was last seen getting into a car with 2 total strangers. Nobody has ever come forward with any information about those 2 men that Mary met that night. And of course, you have to wonder if they kidnapped, hurt, or did something even worse to young Mary. But if something violent did happen, no one has ever found any evidence of it. And more than 50 years later, Mary is still missing. Oh, and as far as the Little Miss X skeleton that they recovered, well, no one ever learned her true identity either. My heart goes out to both these 2 victims, as well as all of the other victims I've talked about in this video. Please show them some love in the comments. I really appreciate it when you guys do that. And if you think these stories were terrifyingly interesting, maybe you'll like this video next as well. And so give it a click, and thank you all so much for watching.